Let us go deep into lockdown in Melbourne and catch up with demographer Bernard Salt. Bernard, good to talk to you again. How are you coping with the lockdown?
Well, I've been here before, Chris. So yes, I'm fine. I'm coping. So I think it's just something we need to get through.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. I speak to some people down there though who are casual workers. It's a bit different for them. Thankfully, that announcement today will help people out a little bit. I wanted to talk to you, go back to our discussions earlier about why the virus might behave more differently in Melbourne to other cities. And you talked about some demographics there. And one of your theories was that Melbourneites moved around the city a bit more. Now, I wanted to get you back because another demographer, Liz Allen, has looked at data and challenged this. Do you think one of you's right, one's wrong, or there's a bit both a little bit right?
No. In fact, I've read Liz's work, and she does fabulous work. And I certainly agree. There's no significant difference in terms of density or in transportation, use of public transport, and that sort of thing. There are a little bit of differences here and there, and the concentration of migrants and so forth. The point that I was making, it was almost a year ago when I talked about the fluidity and mobility across Melbourne. It wasn't really addressed in Liz's work, which was great from a demographic point of view. But I think in terms of geography, that Sydney is a sunken river system, if you like, and it breaks down the city into a number of self-contained regions. The northern beaches, for example, is almost like a peninsula. It's actually it's a component of the city within the city, and that logic also applies with the harbour and all sorts of creeks and rivers and whatever, breaking down the city into little clumps. It's not as easy to move fluidly across Sydney as it is Melbourne. Melbourne, on the other hand, is built on a broad, flat plain. It's a bit like a fried egg, with the egg white spreading in every direction. And then if you look at certainly the eastern suburbs, it's crisscrossed a bit like a checkerboard in north-south roads, like Warrigal Road and others, and Springvale Road and Blackburn Road, and east-west roads as well. So you can move around the city much more easily. There's a fluidity to Melbourne, whereas in Sydney, it's more clustered, if you like. And I posed the idea a year ago, whether in fact that means that Melbourne is more open, if you like, to the prospect of transmission because of that fluidity.
It is an interesting point. Now, Liz Allen put out data saying that Melbourne and Sydney are very similar when it comes to population density, when it comes to crowding, when it comes to use of public transport. So she's saying there's nothing greatly different there. But your reflections on Sydney there are true. And in particular, when you think of that one localised lockdown that Sydney had, the northern beaches, in many respects, you couldn't have it happen in a better place because people who live up that way, sure, they'll come out to work and go back, but they go to school there, they socialise there, they hang out at the beaches there. In fact, there was a lot of jokes at the time when they locked them down that the locals were, this is what they'd always dreamed of, blow up the Spit Bridge and keep everyone else away.
Well, in fact, there's a number of parts of Sydney that are like that. So the northern beaches is one. If you have to have an outbreak, then, that kind of contains it. But the other place I would say would be the Shire, Sutherland Shire, is similarly contained and surrounded by water, National Park and the ocean and so forth. And the other area is, of course, the Central Coast, which again is separated from metropolitan Sydney proper by the Hawkesbury and so forth. So of Sydney's 5.2 or 3 million people, there's three big chunks that are quite self-contained. Now, with Melbourne, you do have the Mornington Peninsula, but there's no break. There's no sort of major river or topographical feature that separates the Mornington Peninsula from the balance of metropolitan Melbourne.
Just another factor. Just another factor I want to jump in there, and in many respects I'm talking against my own argument because I don't think Melbourne shouldn't be locked down. The numbers just aren't there. If those numbers were in place in Sydney now, there's no way known New South Wales would be locked down. But it is interesting to talk about, especially after last year's really bad outbreak, whether the virus behaves differently. And one of the big factors has got to be climate. A lot of the experts talk about climate, and Melbourne's colder, wetter winter changes your habits. People are indoors more.
Well, that is true, and there's no doubt that winter has started in Melbourne. It does seem to flare up in that was also the evidence in Europe as well. But I suppose I'm floating the idea that it is topographical, that it may well be climate related. I do think there are some issues of bad luck that apply, so these factors, more than say density or traditional demographic factors, is the only thing that I can point to. Look, there might be other reasons. I put a demographic lens across it, and they're the things that I would say are quite different compared to Sydney. We have a broad, flat, fried egg. They have a sunken river system which breaks the city down into a series of self-contained clusters.
Fascinating stuff, Bernard. Always good to talk to you.
My pleasure. Thanks, Chris.
Bernard Salt there in lockdown in Melbourne. And we're going to look at all these angles of these pandemics, and this particular virus. We'll be dealing with it for a while if our governments ever allow us to deal with it properly and sensibly.